Hi there, welcome to another episode of Katie the Science Lady. I'm Mrs. Jacobson, and today's topic is non-Mendelian traits part 2, sex-linked traits and blood typing. So let's learn together. All right, it's time to tackle our second part of the non-Mendelian genetics here. We're going to be talking about sex-linked traits and blood typing traits. And remember that I'm not really going to go into details about how to solve these problems. You can find detailed problem solutions in my how-to genetics section. There's a whole other playlist for that, so just take a look at that. It'll be linked at the end of the video too. So sex-linked traits. They are traits found only on the X and Y chromosomes. These are the chromosomes that are going to give the genetic information to make all our hormones that make us act a certain way. They're going to make us genetically male or genetically female. So that's why we're calling them sex-linked traits, because they're linked to our biological sex. X-linked traits are way more common than Y-linked traits. And this is partially because the X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome, so it has more room for traits. And the Y-linked traits are only found in men, so they're just less common. They may be dominant or recessive. I would say that recessive sex-linked traits are pretty common. There are some dominant sex-linked traits. You just have to read carefully when you get a question about them. And they are usually, and I always represent them this way, with a superscript. So you'll have the X there, and then up above it, you'll have like a capital N or a lowercase n. And in this case, we have it shown like this: X big R, X little r. Now, if you have a Y chromosome and it's an X-linked trait, you will have nothing next to the Y. That's the key thing to remember, is that whatever it's linked to, that's where the allele will be. So if it's a Y-linked trait, again, they're not very common, but they do exist. If it's a Y-linked trait, you're only going to have a big R or little r next to the Y, and there will be nothing next to the X. So it's just something to keep your brain around. Whenever you're doing a question about sex-linked traits or you're trying to solve a problem, make sure you read carefully. You need to know if it's X on the X chromosome or on the Y chromosome, and you need to know if it's dominant or recessive. So make sure you highlight or underline that information before you even start to try and tackle it. Always a good start. We also have the Y allele, which again, if it's X-linked, would not have anything attached to it. Here's a visual of the X chromosome, the nice big pink one here, and the Y chromosome, the blue one over here. The Y chromosome just honestly has less information. Now, if we're going to solve a sex-linked trait question, we have to set it up a specific way. And you can do this a couple of different ways. I'm just a stickler for my way because I think it helps. But if you have another way that you like to set these up or that you think would work, I'm sure it will be just fine. But if you're not sure how to set these up and you're looking for a method, go ahead and follow this one. Some examples of sex-linked traits or X-linked traits are color blindness and hemophilia. Color blindness is an issue with your rods and cones in your eye where some of those signals get crossed and you may not be able to see certain colors, or they may be switched in your brain. Hemophilia is a blood clotting disease, and essentially your blood doesn't clot or has a lack of clotting factor, which means that if you get a cut or an injury, your blood does not want to stay inside you. It will continually leave your body. Because when we get injured and we get a small cut on our arm, our blood clots to keep it from running out of our body. Hemophilia, that doesn't really happen. So these are some pretty serious conditions. People can live easily with color blindness, and they have those new really cool glasses now that help people with color blindness see all the different colors. These are more common in males. Again, the reason for this: if it's a recessive trait, you need to have both copies of the allele. If you're male, you only have one X chromosome. So either you have it or you don't. For females, we can still be heterozygous. We can have one dominant and one recessive allele and not actually have that disease or that disorder or trait, whatever you want to call it. So it's more common in men because they only have one shot at it. Either they have it or they don't. They don't get to be what's called a carrier or a heterozygous person. And in our case, heterozygous people for sex-linked traits are always female because they have two X chromosomes. So they can have two opportunities at the allele, where males can only have one opportunity at the allele. So if we're going to fill in a Punnett square, you would do it similarly to this. So over here we can say we've got X big N Y, and it honestly doesn't matter right now what this represents, but we can go ahead and say that color blindness is going to be little n, and regular vision is going to be big N. So this person up here is male, they're XY, and they have big N, or dominant, so normal vision. On the side here we have our female, XX, and she has one normal dominant allele for normal vision, and one little n allele for color blindness. So she carries that allele, that's why she's called the carrier, but ultimately the dominant normal vision shows through. So she has normal vision, this man has normal vision too. But because she's a carrier, we have to be careful. They could potentially have children with color blindness. Let's take a look. If we cross this like a normal Punnett square, and you do, the alleles on the top of the Punnett square move down, and the alleles on the side of the Punnett square move across. If we fill it in, it looks like this. Now we have X big N, that's a girl, so XX is a girl, and she is going to be normal color, normal vision. Over here we have a boy, XY, and he has big N, so he has normal vision as well. Down here we have another female, XX. She has one allele for normal vision and carries the allele for color blindness, so she's a carrier, but still not affected. But down here in this corner, we have our other boy, XY, and he only has the recessive allele for color blindness, so he is going to be colorblind. And if you're wondering what color blindness is, I recommend you go and just Google color blindness test. There are some really cool tests you can take just visually on your computer. And this would be an example of one of the pictures you might see. For example, I see kind of brownish orange colors around the outside. I see some pink on the inside here. And then I also see the number 74 in green. So if you don't see that, you could potentially be colorblind. Or maybe I am. We'll find out. I'm not colorblind. But that's what you should see there. So if this is interesting to you, go ahead and Google color blindness test, and you'll be able to take one online. It's pretty interesting. The second type of non-Mendelian trait we're talking about today is blood type. So most of you have probably had your blood drawn at some point for either a test, you've had a finger prick, you've had something your blood's been taken from. Some of you haven't, and that's totally fine. But if you've had your blood type taken, you may not even remember it. It's not something they commonly will tell you when they do your blood, because they have to do some analysis on your blood to get you your blood type. Some of you know it, and that's awesome. Human blood type is a trait, and we have 3 alleles for this blood type trait. So it's also more commonly called the ABO blood typing, ABO being the 3 alleles. So you may hear it referred to as that as well. In this system, for lack of a better term here, A and B alleles are co-dominant to each other. So remember, this means that they are going to both show through if you have a heterozygote. So if you have the A allele and the B allele, you will see them both. That's, remember, a little review of codominance from our last section. O is recessive, so that the ABO, the O part of that is the recessive allele. And that's, you've probably heard of blood type O. That's where you have 2 recessive alleles. So let's kind of get into a little bit more of the details here. We have 4 different phenotypes for blood type. We have A, B, AB, and O type blood. Now, you can also have positive and negative blood. That's talking about the Rh factor. I'll get to that at the very end and kind of explain why it doesn't matter as much as you might think. The genotypes we can have for these are a little bit different because you can have multiple genotypes for each phenotype. If you have type A blood, you can be IA or IAI. Remember that I I'm using is for the O. If you're type B, you can be IB or IBI. An I with nothing next to it is the O allele. For type AB blood, you can only be one genotype, IBIA or IAIB. It doesn't matter if you flip them back and forth, it's the same thing. And then for blood type O, you can only be one genotype as well, little I. And this is how it would look here. So again, IAIA, some people like capital letters. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. There will be some genetics professor out there somewhere. It's like, how dare you? It's fine. Some people just use A, B's, and O's, honestly. However it helps you remember is fine by me. So if you were just using A, B, and O, you would have just AA, AO, BB, BO, AB, and OO. You can absolutely do all of your questions using it like that. But I like to kind of be a little more proper and have my IAIA here so that my students get used to using all these letters. But students, if you're watching, you can use A, B, and O, and I won't be offended. So these are all the genotypes we can have. It corresponds with the phenotype of your actual blood, the actual look of your blood. You have proteins that are on the outside of your blood that correspond to those different alleles, A and B. So if you have the A allele, you have these A proteins. If you have the B allele, you have these B proteins. If you have both A and B alleles, you've got both of those proteins. And then if you have none of the A and B alleles and you're just a little I or O, you have nothing on the outside of your blood. So this is why it looks interesting and a little bit different. Now, blood types are important to know because they react with each other sometimes pretty violently. You are meant to have your own blood in your own body. We were not designed to take blood from other people, really, because if we have foreign blood, like blood from somebody else, and it enters your system, there's a potential that your body can start fighting off that blood. Think that it's attacking you, that it's a foreign invader, and it will start to attack it. So you have to be really careful when donating blood, when receiving blood, to make sure that you're doing the right things, because there can be a reaction if you have a transfusion or that transfer of blood from person to person. All right, this is the last thing we're going to talk about today. I told you we'd talk about the Rh factor, or the thing that makes your blood positive or negative, and why it's not as big a deal as you might think. So the Rh factor is, again, just another protein that can be found on the outside of your blood. If you are negative or have negative blood, it means that you don't have the Rh factor. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean anything for you. You're totally fine. If you do have the Rh factor on your blood, again, it's just another protein on the outside of your blood. It doesn't do anything for you. You're totally fine. It's not a positive or negative thing. The only issue where Rh factors can come into play is when a woman is pregnant. If her and her baby have differences in their Rh factor, there can be some pretty serious reactions when the baby is born and before the baby is born. So that's just something the doctor needs to take into account, and they may do some blood testing if you are positive or negative for the Rh factor when you're pregnant. But other than that, that's all we've got to go about blood typing.
Let's review what we've learned today about sex-linked traits and blood typing. Sex-linked traits are found on the X and Y chromosomes, but typically they're found most often on the X chromosomes. These traits are usually recessive conditions, things like color blindness or hemophilia. They run in families. Because most of these traits are X-linked or on the X chromosome, males typically either have a condition or don't have it, whereas a female who is XX can be heterozygous. She can be a carrier, meaning she carries the gene for the condition, but doesn't actually have it. Again, if this female has color blindness in her allele, so she might have one allele for color blindness and the other allele is normal, she would appear normal, but she would still carry that gene and be able to pass it on to her children. Blood typing is pretty simple. It's two codominant alleles, the IA and IB allele, and we have one recessive allele as well, the little I allele. If you have more questions about these or would like to see me work through a couple of these different types of non-Mendelian genetics problems, please click here. There are videos from my How-To Genetics series where I break this down step by step and really get into the nitty-gritty of how to solve these problems. Well, that's it for today. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you later.